Hello, and welcome to the Week 9 Judge class. This week we will be going over the MTR, and uh, so first off, my name is John Aratinji.
And I'm Stacy Winchell, and we are level 2 judges from Rochester, Minnesota. And as John said, today we are going to be talking about the MTR, which is short for the Magic Tournament Rules document. Now, this is actually a relatively lengthy document. There's a lot of it. We're going to be doing basically some key highlights that you can expect. There are kind of more common things that will come up for you as a level 1 judge, as well as things that are possibly more likely to be on a level 1 judge test.
Yeah.
So.
So a couple of things before we begin. So we're using YouTube live for our technology tonight. If you happen to be watching us live, in spite of several technical difficulties that have slightly delayed our recording time, you can. There's a live chat which you can talk with us on. So if you have any questions throughout the class, please leave us a message in there, and we will answer your question when it comes up. Otherwise, if you're watching us not at the time, you can of course always send any questions to me on my YouTube page or on Facebook. We both see the Facebook group messages, so yeah, we can take any questions that you have about anything. And considering this is the last week before the review week, especially try to get in anything you've been wondering about.
Yes.
But besides that, let's start by going over the practice test from last week.
Great.
Alrighty.
So, practice test. So, question number 1. AJ has a bear cub with aqueous form attached to it. He attacks with it, and in his second main phase, he realizes he missed his trigger. The opponent noticed he missed the trigger, but did not say anything. How do you handle this, and did the opponent do anything wrong? First things first, you are not responsible to point out your opponent's missed triggers, so the opponent did not do anything wrong here. Now, it looks like, from the sounds of it, he's in his second main phase. Doesn't sound like anybody's actually done anything. So, according to the jar, if not too many decisions have been made, not much has happened, then you just put the trigger on the stack right now. This is considered a reasonable amount of time. It's not disruptive to the game state, so we put it on the stack now and resolve it. And this is true at all tournament levels. It is okay for the opponent to ignore their opponent's triggers. They are not required to point out their opponent's triggers.
Yeah.
So
question number 2. Audrey casts Supreme Verdict using only white mana. Both Audrey and Natalie put some creatures into the graveyard. Audrey passes a turn, and on Natalie's draw step, after Natalie drew a card, Audrey realizes her mistake and calls you over. How do you fix the situation? So Supreme Verdict, obviously you're supposed to pay a blue as well as some white mana. Now, the only thing that's happened since then is we've moved to Natalie's draw step. She just drew her card for turn. And because not too much has happened, we can safely go ahead and just rewind this back to the point when Supreme Verdict back to the point when they were casting Supreme Verdict without having the right mana to pay it. So we're just going to rewind it. Since we don't know what card Natalie drew for turn, we're going to just take a random card from her hand and set it on top of the library and do not shuffle it. Very important to remember not to shuffle it at regular REL. But yeah, we put all the creatures killed by Supreme Verdict back on the battlefield, and we put the verdict back into Audrey's hand, and play continues from here. Note that Audrey does not need to cast Supreme Verdict. If she had like a blue source, she could have tapped, but she didn't. She doesn't need to do that now. She can choose to cast it or not. Basically, they get to remake all the decisions since then. But since it's not much, we can safely rewind this.
Yes. All right, number 3. While resolving divination, Artemis accidentally puts 3 cards in his hand instead of 2. How do you handle this when the opponent calls you over? So since the identity of the extra card is not known to all players, We simply choose a card at random from Artemis's hand and put it on top of his library. Um, Note again, at regular REL, you do not shuffle the library. So there, there's a little advantage here because he's going to know what's on top of his library, but at regular REL, you want to get it as close to the correct game state as possible, and this is the closest that we can get to. Note that there is a significantly different fix if you are a competitive player at competitive REL, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about regular REL.
Yep. So number 4, Johnny and Nicole are going to time in a match. Johnny asks Nicole if they'd like to just roll a die and see who wins so no one gets a draw, which Nicole agrees to. A spectator calls you over and explains what happens. What do you do, if anything? So this is an unfortunate situation, but deciding a game of Magic using any other means than just playing the game of Magic is a serious problem, and it requires the players to be disqualified. Try to educate them on why this is an issue, and don't forget to get their side of the story. When you fill out a disqualification report, it'll ask for like statements from various people. So make sure you get them to give their side of the story. Just so there aren't any problems in the future. Every DQ ends up going through the investigations committee. So they're unlikely to get a suspension for something like that. But if they happen to be doing all the time, or on multiple occasions, they might get looked at funny. So just get their statements. And you can always get help from like level 2. You can contact us. You can contact your regional coordinator for help for the disqualification process.
All right, number 5. Arthur is 12 minutes late to his match, but wants to play. What do you tell Arthur, and do you let him play? So, after being 10 minutes late, Arthur has forfeited his match. That is part of the judging at regular REL document. He may continue playing in the tournament after this point if he wishes, but after 10 minutes, he has lost this match. And that is typically also, if for the competitive players out there, this is typically something that is announced at the beginning of each day as what tardiness penalties are. And this is basically a tardiness penalty. But yeah, judging a regular REL document, stated right in there, if it's more than 10 minutes, he has forfeited the match. So, yeah. All right, number 6. While scrying 2, Anderson accidentally looks at and begins reordering the top 3 cards of his library. How is this resolved? So, since he's already reordered them, we don't know which card was the 3rd card down anymore. So we're going to take one of those 3 cards at random that he is looking at and shuffle it into his library. If he has scryed before, we make sure to keep the known portion of the library, basically, the bottom, in the order that it was already in. Note, there are the 2 cards that he's currently scrying. He'll get to scry those. He'll get to finish his scry once we fix randomizing the part of his deck. This is basically, you're treating it as he accidentally looked at an extra card. Didn't draw it, so we don't have to do anything like that. Just, take one of the 3 random cards, shuffle it in, into the unknown part of the deck, and then have him finish his scry from there.
All right, number 7. So Andy casts Unsummon on Nate's Nate's Bear Cub. Nate put the card into his graveyard, thinking the Unsummon was a Doomblade. A turn later, the players realize the error and call you over. Andy says that he noticed the error when Unsummon resolved, but didn't want to say anything, as this way Nate couldn't replay the Bear Cub. How do you handle this? So Unsummon, he's obviously supposed to return it to his hand. Instead, he put it in his graveyard, and his opponent, who cast the Unsummon, didn't say anything because he thought it would benefit him. So he knew, that this problem happened. He did not call a judge. Now, the only other thing we should investigate here a little bit is, did Andy know that he is not allowed to not point out,
Well, the only thing you are not required to point out is a missed triggered ability. That is the only thing you are not required to point out of your opponent's stuff. Putting a card in the wrong zone, such as this, because clearly that bear cub was supposed to be in the hand, not in the graveyard. That is against the rules. It's a game rules violation. So it is against the rules. He knew it was against the rules because he noticed he knew it was against the rules. He just didn't say anything because he didn't want his opponent to replay the bear cub. And he gains a significant advantage from this because I'm sure that bear cub is much harder, much easier, or much harder to deal with when it's my words. His opponent, he gains an advantage.
It's just going to show right back up on the battlefield.
Yeah. Doomblade is a far better card than Unsummon.
Yeah.
Just typically. So, those are the 3 things you need to call it cheating. Because this is cheating. Cheating is a serious problem, and cheating is a disqualification.
Yeah.
See our speech 2 minutes ago about how to handle disqualifications.
Yeah. So number 8. Alex mulligans his opening hand, drawing 6 cards. Upon inspecting his opening hand, he realizes he accidentally drew 7. How is it handled, and after handling the problem, can he continue to mulligan? So at regular REL, Alex accidentally drew 1 too many cards in the mulligan process. He was supposed to have 6, he has 7. So at regular REL, we have a really simple fix. We're just going to take one of those cards, all the excess cards, I should say.
In this case, 1.
In this case, 1. And we're going to take one at random, and then shuffle it back into the library. And then if he wants to continue mulliganing, he certainly can from that point. But yeah, we're just going to, like with the way back there, Artemis accidentally drawing 3 cards instead of 2.
You mean scrying?
Oh, wait.
No, you're right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Artemis
Question. Accidentally drawing 3 cards instead of 2. With the mulligan, it's pretty much the same thing, except with the mulligan, we're going to shuffle it in.
Yes.
And
then again, he can keep mulliganing from here if his 6 is not to his liking.
Yeah.
So. Alright. Allison has Airy Worshippers on the battlefield, and it untapped this turn. During her upkeep, she never mentioned the trigger, and moved to her draw step where she drew a card. After that, she realizes she missed the trigger and calls you over. How do you handle this? So Airy Worshippers, which we have the picture of in the bottom, it has an inspired trigger. When it becomes untapped, you may pay blue and 2. If you do, put a 2/2 blue bird enchantment creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Now, because this trigger has a May in it, and it is assumed that since she did not mention it, that she chose not to pay for its ability. This is true of any May trigger. If it says May in the title and your opponent forgets to do it, it's assumed they didn't do it.
Yeah.
There is no problem. Please play on from here.
Yeah. So number 10, Avery casts Pacifism on Natasha's Black Knight, which has protection from white, which Pacifism is white. After 3 turns of many plays and card draws, they realized it was illegal to target the Black Knight with Pacifism. How do you handle this situation? So, Black Knight, it has pro-white, and we have a white enchantment enchanting it. Now, if it were caught like, cast Pacifism, targeting Black Knight, okay, that resolves, pass turn. Oh, wait, then we could rewind. If there hadn't been hardly anything occurring between now and then, we could rewind. But it's been several turns, stuff has happened. It's not that easy. So what we do at this point is we just fix everything that is currently illegal and go on from here. So Pacifism cannot be enchanting Black Knight. That's part of what protection says. It can't be enchanted by anything with the chosen attribute. So we just have the Pacifism fall off, which means it goes to the graveyard. And then we will just play on from here.
The big deal is once significant numbers of plays have happened, you can't rewind. You can't rewind 3 turns of gameplay that involve multiple things happening. So again, fix anything illegal. Pacifism falls off, goes to the graveyard, and you play on from here.
I mean,
that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So, all right. Then now on to week number 9. Is it week 9?
Yep, it's week 9.
All right.
So, the MTR has a lot of information in it. It covers everything from defining what a uh, like tournament organizer is to just everything. Everything about running a tournament.
Literally everything. It is a very lengthy document.
Yeah.
If you have a question that about like running tournaments and things like that, this document will have the answer. Today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going over some of the highlights of this, some of the
Yeah.
I guess the more important parts that are more relevant to you as a judge candidate and as a possible level 1.
Yeah.
So
So wait, we're just gonna go over a few sections, which should have most of what you're gonna need. Today in the description, I included a link to the MTR. So if you want to look at what we're going over, you can certainly do that.
do you want to get the questions quick? Make sure we didn't have any questions about the test before we move on.
Yeah.
Okay. Just checking.
All right. So the first really important section is section 2, tournament mechanics. So section 2.1, the match structure. So a match consists of a series of games that are played until one side has won a set number of games, usually 2. Drawn games do not count towards this goal, so you can draw, 70 games. As long as you get to your 2 wins, it doesn't matter how many games you play total. And if the round ends before a player has won the required number of games, the winner of the match is the player who has won the most games at that point. If both players have won an equal amount of games, then it's a draw. And the tournament organizer may change the required number of games to be won for any portion of the tournament, as long as this is announced before the tournament begins. This doesn't really happen.
This doesn't happen outside of Pro Tours
Yes.
and SCG Invitationals, I believe, also are the top 8. I think is best of 5.
True.
But outside of that, sorry, I shouldn't even say best of 5. In that case, it is the first to 3 wins technically. Yep. But this doesn't usually happen, though. It is the most important thing out of this is to note that it is the first person to 2 wins. So if something I have played a competitive Magic game, a competitive Magic match where I have played in a game 4. If for some reason you finish game 3 and let's say you finish game 3 in a draw, you cast Flame Rift and both players are at 4 or less life. You both go to 0. You both die as a state base, which is a draw. Shuffle up and go to game 4. That's the most important thing to note out of the match structure. So
yeah.
Next part, 2.2 is the play draw rule. For the first game of the match, the winner of a random method, coin toss die roll. This is very common. Chooses whether they get to play first or play second. It is a note that you can choose to play second. Dredge players of the world may unite in that choice. The winner must make this choice before they look at their hand. If the winner states no choice and they look at their hand, it's assumed that they're playing first. And the player who plays first in a one-on-one match, of course, skips their first draw step on their turn. This is referred to as the play draw rule. After each game in a match, the loser of that game gets to decide who plays first in the next game. They can wait until they are completely done sideboarding to make that decision. If the previous game was a draw, the player who decided to play or draw at the beginning of the drawn game gets choice again. In certain premier tournament events, which is the World Championships, World Magic Cup qualifiers, the more relevant one for you as a level 1 is preliminary Pro Tour qualifiers and Grand Prix trials. Actually, Grand Prix trials aren't on here anymore. World Magic Cup qualifier.
This might be slightly dated. This is Nita's.
Oh, sure. Okay. So I believe this is true at Grand Prix trials and preliminary Pro Tour qualifiers as well. There is pretty much anything with competitive REL. Grand Prix trials, we'll have to check up on, since that's not required to be competitive REL anymore. But there is a special play draw rule used for the single elimination matches. In the single elimination, top 4 or top 8, depending on the event, the player that was ranked higher in the Swiss rounds gets choice as to whether they play first or second in the first game of each match. In the second and subsequent games, same as before, loser of the previous game gets choice. This alternate play draw rule may be used in other events. It just needs to be announced by the TO or head judge at the start of the event.
Yeah. The next part of that section is pregame procedures. All right, so the following steps must be performed in a timely manner before each game begins. So if game actions were taken during the previous game, so if you played the game, players may exchange cards in their decks for cards in their sideboards. Players may not sideboard during games that have been restarted. So if you ultimate a Karn liberated, you do not get to suddenly sideboard. Though that'd be pretty awesome.
That would be awesome, but no, you do not.
So players shuffle their decks. The third, players present their decks to their opponent for additional shuffling.
There's a little section here that says steps 1 and 2 may be repeated. The important thing is I can sideboard, I can start shuffling, I can decide to change my mind, make some different choices, re-sideboard, shuffle again. I can keep doing these. The important thing is the third step is I present my deck to my opponent for additional shuffling. That's the point where I can no longer go back and change my sideboarding choices.
Yeah. Third, you present your deck to your opponent for shuffling. At casual events or whatnot, people tend to just cut, but technically you are supposed to shuffle it.
You're allowed to shuffle it. That's an important thing too. Like if you have a player that doesn't want to allow their opponent to shuffle their deck, their opponent, by the Magic Tournament rules, is allowed to shuffle their opponent's deck.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, they're highly encouraged to shuffle their opponent's deck.
Yes. After the first or subsequent game of a match, the relevant player must decide whether to play first or second at this point. So
if they haven't done so already.
Yeah. If the player doesn't choose, like we said before, they'll be considered to just want to play first. So each player draws 7 cards. Optionally, you can deal these face down on the table to count them first. And at that point, if you draw too many cards, putting one back doesn't impact you.
Yes, because they're random cards.
Yeah.
Because nobody's looked at them yet.
Once you look at them, it's
then we do that mulligan procedure thing that we talked about in the test from last week.
Yep. And then so after mulligans,
No, you skipped it. So everybody draws their cards. Then each player in turn order decides whether or not to mulligan.
Oh yeah.
So let's say John and I are playing. I look at my 7. My 7's crap. I'm gonna shuffle it in and take 6. Now he has a little. Now he has the choice as to whether or not to mulligan. He gets to know my decision. And he can take a little bit of time, while I'm shuffling and getting my next 6. But he has to make his final choice before I tell him whether or not I'm keeping my 6. That's kind of his final answer, which is different from the way rules used to work. How rules used to work is I get to keep mulliganing, and John could be sitting on this handful of he could be on this 1 land hand, and I go to 4, and then he's like, screw that, I'm just keeping my 7 now, even though he wouldn't have kept the 7 originally. But yeah, current rules, I mulligan, he mulligans, I mulligan, he mulligans, and so forth.
Yeah.
Or makes the choice whether to not mulligan. And once you've decided to not mulligan, you're stuck by that. You are held to that.
Then, once players have completed mulligans, they have if their starting hand, if their hand is less than the normal starting hand size, so in general 7 cards. If they start with less than 7 cards after mulligans, then they're going to get to scry 1 before the start of their first turn.
In turn order if both players mulligan.
Yes.
So in our game, if we both mulligan to 6, I would scry first, then John would scry.
Yeah.
And then you start playing Magic.
Yeah.
Note that none of these are game actions. Remember how we said earlier, in a post sideboard game, if no, you only get to sideboard if no if game actions were taken. Mulligans are not game actions. The scry is not actually a game action. That's technically part of the pregame procedure. It's not until somebody plays their land for the turn on their first turn that somebody has taken a game action.
And this is mostly relevant at competitive REL for when players get penalties. Though if me and Stacy both are mulliganing down to 3 and we're like, this game will be awful, let's just draw this game and move on to the next one. Then
we don't get to change sideboard because game actions weren't taken.
Yep.
All right. Next one, 2.4, conceding or intentionally drawing games or matches. If a game or match is not completed, players may concede or mutually agree to a draw in that game or match. So like I said, we both mulligan to 3. We don't want to play this game. We can decide to, we don't want to play this game. We're going to draw this game, go to the next game. That is perfectly legal. A match, this is more from competitive, I guess, where you have result slips. But a match is considered complete once the result slip is filled out, or if match slips are not being used, once a player leaves the table after gameplay is finished. Until that point, either player may concede to or draw with the other, though if the conceding player won a game in the match, that match must be reported as a 2-1. Intentional draws are always reported as 0-0-3.
Now, of course, like we talked about last week, players may not agree to a concession or draw in exchange for any reward or incentive. Doing so will be considered bribery.
Which, even at regular REL, is considered a serious problem and a DQ.
Yep.
So, the important thing is there, let's say John and I are playing, I'm like, you know what, I have to leave. You're obviously staying. I'm going to concede to you because I have to leave anyway. That's perfectly reasonable. This is kind of one of those areas of judging, like when you get into the competitive aspect of it, it's you can't concede in exchange for anything. It is an important thing. That is bribery. However, you know what? We're not talking about competitive. I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
Because as a level 1, you're not expected to know. You're not expected to have to deal with competitive REL. So. Next section, 2.5, the end of match procedure. If the match time limit is reached before a winner is determined, control deck mirror, go into time. That's what we'll just throw that as our example. John and I are both blue players playing Miracles in Legacy, and neither of us can find a win condition or resolve a win condition. The player whose turn it is, so time is called. Let's say I'm in the middle of my turn when time is called. I will finish my turn, and then there are 5 additional total turns being played. Usually this is going to mean, John will take turn 1, I'll get turn 2, he'll get turn 3, I'll get 4, and he'll get 5. However, let's say I am casting Time Warp in my deck. Let's say I cast a Time Warp on my turn 4. Well, then I also get turn 5, and John does not get his last turn, and he's a little bit sad. Let's see. So
team tournaments.
That's what I'm looking for. Yep. Team tournaments featuring multiple players playing together, which is basically two-headed giant at this point, use 3 turns instead of 5. Once time is called, no new games should begin. So remember what we said earlier about game actions. If time is called, and let's say I'm in the middle of mulliganing to 5, while time is called, game actions have not been taken yet. This game does not even get to start.
Yeah.
If I've played my land because I kept my 5, and then time is called, game actions have been taken. You get your 5-turn extension like normal.
Yeah.
If a judge assigned a time extension, let's say something happened, had to run to the restroom, or just or let's say you, as a level 1 judge, you got called to answer a complicated rules question, and you were over there for like 3-4 minutes. You can give yourself a time extension. That is perfectly legal. The end of match, you can give yourself a time extension. Make it appropriate to the amount of time you were busy doing whatever it is you were doing, or that person was doing. And then the end of match procedure does not begin until the end of the time extension. as this is more towards competitive RAL, but as a judge at like Grand Prix and SCG Opens, I like to hand out time extensions like candy because I want players to be able to play their full round of Magic. So obviously you don't want extensions to get too long because then that one match could go super long. It could hold everybody up, but really, is 2 to 3 minutes for somebody to run to the restroom quick gonna hold up your tournament for that long of a time? No.
Just don't let the scorekeepers hear you say that.
Yeah, right. I can feel my inbox flooding from Jordan already.
But
I think
so
I covered everything there. Oh no.
In a single elimination rounds, matches may not end in a draw. So if
this is basically referring to
playoffs.
Yes, top 8s.
Yeah.
Top 8, top 4.
So if all players have equal game wins, the player with the highest life wait.
Actually, hang on. We're gonna back up here. We are not correct on the single elimination finals because single elimination finals are untimed. What this is referring to is an event that is single elimination, but is not technically a single elimination playoff. It is a single elimination event with time limit in the rounds. These you usually see at, they're commonly referred to as grinders. People playing like 32-person single elimination events at Grand Prix trying to win 2 buys. So single elimination rounds, matches may not end in a draw. So let's say we're both playing, we're in game 3, we go to time. And we play our 5 turns, nobody's won the game. So in a single elimination only in a single elimination with a time limit, let's say whoever has the highest life total wins the game. If for some reason both of us have the same life total, we're playing miracles, we're both at 18. Or in the event we're between games, we'll get to that in a minute. That has a fun story, and I'll share that story. Then we continue the game with an additional state-based action. If a player does not have the highest life total, he or she loses the game. Two-headed giant teams are treated as a single player for determining game winner in this case. So I've heard of this happening. So there's 2 players at a Grand Prix trial, a grinder for Grand Prix Minneapolis a while ago. And so I'm playing against John. Time has been called. We're going to game 3. Because you don't technically start the game. You don't even get 5 turns. We're starting game 3 with the state-based effect of whoever doesn't have the highest life total loses. So John is on the draw. And he's mulliganing down. I'm pretty sure this is a limited event. And he keeps an opening hand of Mountain, Raging Goblin. It's pretty good, right? It's like, okay, play my Mountain, play my Raging Goblin, get in for haste, getcha. But he's on the draw. I, on the play, kept a hand of Plains, Soul Warden.
Soul Warden, if you're not familiar with the card, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life.
So John can't play his Raging Goblin because it gains me a life, but he can't not play the Raging Goblin because then I attack for 1 and kill him. So dead on board. Like I said, don't worry too much about that single elimination rounds thing because that only exists if it's a single elimination round with a time limit, which only exists at things like grinders.
Though the very first sentence, single elimination rounds, matches may not end in a draw.
Those
do apply to playoffs, but the rest of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, 2.6 time extensions. If a judge pauses a match for more than 1 minute while the round clock is running, he or she should extend the match time appropriately. If the match was interrupted to perform a deck check, players are awarded time equal to the time the deck check took plus 3 minutes. And certain slow pay penalties add turns rather than a time extension. These additional turns are added to the end of match additional rounds. So basically, if you stop the match for more than a minute, give them a time extension for how long you stop the match.
This is basically what I can point to when the scorekeepers email me mean nasty things about making their tournament run longer. I'm like, the MTR says I can do this.
Zach doesn't care.
I know Zach. I know Zach doesn't care.
And for deck checks, if you that's competitive REL. But if you ever end up doing them, add 3 minutes just to give them time for shuffling as well.
I guess you can technically do a deck check at a Grand Prix trial if you've collected deck lists. But if you've collected deck lists, then now it's competitive REL. So that's, yeah.
So 2.7, deck registration. Players are required to register their decks and sideboards in competitive and professional REL tournaments. The head judge may require registration in regular REL tournaments.
Important to note, professional REL tournaments, obviously it's the Pro Tour. Day 2 of a Grand Prix is also considered professional REL. You won't have to worry about that as level 1, but it's a thing to know.
Yeah, I definitely know I got a random question about RELs.
Probably for your L2 test.
Yeah. But yeah. So
sorry, back on task here.
Really, we don't need to worry about deck lists at level 1.
Well, it's in here in the level 1 stuff because last time I ran this class, level 1s can run Grand Prix trials, which as a level 1 you can still run a Grand Prix trial. It's still considered a premier event. However, it is not required to be run at competitive REL anymore. You can still run it at competitive REL, and if you feel comfortable with that, you are most certainly welcome to do so. I actually highly recommend it. Since there's buys on the line, especially if it's for like a local Grand Prix, it's probably a good thing to do. It also gives anybody playing in this Grand Prix trial a kind of a taste of what they should expect for the competitive level, rules enforcement level that they'll be playing at the Grand Prix. So yeah, deck registration. Registered deck lists record the original composition of each deck and sideboard. Once the deck list has been accepted by a tournament official, it may not be altered. Players can request to see their deck list between matches. So, like, let's say I'm going to a tournament, I borrowed a deck from a friend, I don't remember what's in my sideboard. I can ask a judge to see my deck list so that I can de-sideboard correctly. Generally, deck lists are not public information and are not shared with other players during a tournament. At constructed level events, though, professional REL tournaments, copies of opponents' deck lists will be provided to players in single elimination playoffs. And this is also very common at SCG Opens as well. The list here is a Pro Tour, Magic World Cup, World Championship, Grand Prix. But again, the professional REL tournaments. I haven't worked in Open in long enough ago to remember if they do it still at the Opens. But the last Open, I have top 8 at an Open, and that was like 2 years ago, and they did provide opponents' deck lists even at the Opens. So, all right, next section.
Deck checks. They must be performed at all competitive and professional REL tournaments, and they have the option to perform deck checks at regular REL tournaments as well, though that would require that you're using deck lists.
Sort of. You know, if you suspect a player is playing like cards in standard, 5 copies of a card.
Sure.
Then I mean, if you're just checking for that, you can do that. If
that's sort of just a generic investigation.
Yeah. But I mean, that's still technically a deck check. So, anyways, continue.
But the DCI recommends that at least 10% of all decks are checked over the course of a tournament. If a player has drawn an opening hand and potentially made mulligan decisions, don't deck check them.
It says here that the contents of the hand will be preserved unless a game loss is issued as a result of the deck check. Honestly, if they've drawn their opening hand and they have made mulligan decisions, do not deck check them. That is what you will get told if you are judging at a competitive level event, such as an SCG Open or Grand Prix, or a PPTQ. If you're working a PPTQ with a level 2, they should be telling you the same thing. If mulligan decisions have been made, if they have looked at an opening hand, it's too late. Don't deck check them. Now, that being said, you can most certainly catch them between games. You don't have to deck check them at the beginning of the round. You can most certainly kind of hang out in the area, and then in between rounds, when they present for game 2, you can get it then. There's no mulligan decisions being made then. Matter of fact, I will highly recommend doing that if you're going to be doing a deck check at a competitive event, because there is a false sense of security amongst players that if they don't get deck checked at the beginning that they're safe. They are not.
Yeah. But we don't really need to talk about
Sorry, I got into it.
You can't sideboard after a deck check.
That is true.
But yeah, let's just go ahead with the next part. 2.9 appeals to the head judge. So if there's multiple judges at an event, the head judge, their ruling is final. So if a player disagrees with the judge's ruling, they have the right to appeal. This means that it goes from whatever non-head judge who took the call, and then it goes directly to the head judge. There isn't like a chain of command or anything. Yep. It's just straight to the head judge. Do not pass go. Do not
pass go. Do not collect $200. Go get the red shirt.
Yeah. So the head judge's rulings are final. It doesn't matter if they give the worst ruling you have ever heard. Their rulings are final.
Which can happen. I have seen. Well, okay. I saw the Facebook post after a particular level 5 judge handed out a poor ruling to an L2 judge. And I'm not going to mention names there, but bad rulings happen.
Yeah.
Everybody makes mistakes. I've made mistakes. John's made mistakes. You will probably make mistakes. But whoever the head judge for that event is, that ruling is final. If you disagree with, now you are required to follow their ruling because you're required to follow judge's instructions and play on from there. If they want to discuss it with you afterwards, sure, that's fine. But bottom line is, whoever the head judge is, that ruling is final. Now, obviously, don't use this and don't abuse this, because there is a judge reporting process. You don't want to end up on the wrong side of that. Make good. Don't purposely make bad rulings. That is a serious problem in and of itself. But you will make mistakes. Mistakes happen. But bottom line is, the head judge's ruling is final.
One thing to note about appeals: a player cannot appeal until you've issued the full ruling.
That is true.
As a floor judge. So if you're like, so I think this is a mistrigger and appeal, I want to appeal. Basically, that's. Well, at competitive REL, it's unsporting conduct, and they get at least a match loss. I
would first inform the player that you're required to let me finish giving my ruling, and then you may appeal. You may happily appeal, or not happily appeal. You are required to let me finish giving my ruling, and then you can appeal my ruling. That is fine. And then if they continue to not let you talk, then they're getting an unsporting conduct penalty. Usually not going to happen. Most players understand that you have to give your ruling first, and then they can appeal.
But at regular REL, definitely inform them that that this is the case. They have to let you finish giving your ruling, and then if they don't, we're actually looking at probably serious problem. Territory. Potential. Maybe game loss to reinforce the behavior, or even a disqualification, depending on the situation at hand.
Again, at regular REL, it's there's a lot of room depending on how you feel about the situation. Don't be power. Don't get mad with power. But if the player's causing a problem, also don't be afraid to deal with that as necessary. All right. 2.10, dropping from a tournament. So players may drop from a tournament at any time, for any reason. If a player drops from a tournament before the first round of play has started, they are considered to not have participated in the tournament and will not be listed in the finishing order, nor receive participation planeswalker points. Players choosing to drop from a tournament must inform the scorekeeper by the means provided for that tournament before the pairings for the next round are generated. At competitive REL, it's on the match slip. At regular REL, tell the person running word, hey, I'm dropping and going home. If a player does not show up for his or her match, he or she will be automatically dropped from the tournament unless they report to the scorekeeper. So in our review question, the person was 12 minutes late. Well, they came back within 12 minutes. They informed whoever's running word that they would like to keep playing, so they're not going to be dropped. But if they don't talk to that person, they get dropped. That is how that works. Players that repeatedly and or intentionally drop from tournaments without informing the scorekeeper of those events may be subject to DCI penalties. Really?
Up to and including suspension.
All right. I'm
not even mad.
Intentionally drop from tournament. I know that it gets filled out. All right, I guess it is technically a penalty, so all penalties get filled out and such, so that makes sense. Players who drop during limited events own the cards that they currently have in their. Oh, that's changed. This has changed. In sealed events, this has changed. In sealed events that require a swap, well, there's no swap anymore. So, you own. Okay, in a limited event that requires registration, you own the cards you open. So how it works with the sealed procedure now, if you're at like a sealed PPTQ, a sealed competitive event, is you'll open your packs, then you're going to pass them to a person across from you who's going to register those cards for you. Then they're going to give them back to you. You own the cards you open. During a draft, you own the cards that you currently have in your possession. That is actually still true in a draft.
Yeah, anything you've drafted so far.
Anything you've drafted so far, the pack you are currently holding, and in the event you still have unopened packs, those unopened packs as well. All right, I can't imagine this happening. Let's say John's brother, who knows nothing about Magic, opens a pack, takes a random common, and passes me a pack that has a mythic, foil mythic, and a Kaladesh invention in it. Like, let's just go real big here. And I stare at this pack and I'm like, I guess I drop. I take my pack and go home. That is legal. You are currently the owner of whatever cards are currently in your possession. Yeah, that is how that works. So let's see. If a player drops from a tournament after a cut has been made, which normally that'd be like, cut to top 8 for pretty much any competitive event. No other player is advanced as a replacement. So you cut to top 8. And one of the guys in top 8's like, I'm out of I know I made top 8. I'm out of time and I have to go home. That player's opponent receives a buy.
Or actually, the highest ranked player, the highest ranked remaining player receives a buy for that round instead.
Wait, that's what?
This is the most current MTR.
Oh, okay. All right. The highest ranking player remaining. Okay, so you do get somebody advanced to the top 8. So if we get to top 8 and one of the people in top 8's like, dude, I gotta go home, 9th place gets to make it into top 8. That is what the most recent MTR says.
No, no other player is advanced. So like if player number 7 drops, we don't add in player number 8. There will be a top.
I see what
the top 7 will be playing, but the highest ranking remaining player, the number 1 seed. The first player gets a bye. Instead of, if it were the 7 which dropped, normally they would be paired with the 2. So instead, the 1 will get the bye, and then the rest of them get paired. It's a little ugly, but
I mean that makes perfect sense when you see it.
Yeah.
As you can tell from my kind of befuddled response here, that has never actually come up for me. So okay.
Yeah.
So players who have dropped from a tournament may re-enter a tournament at the discretion of the head judge. Players may not re-enter a portion of the tournament that requires a deck that they did not draft or build. They may not re-enter a tournament after any cut has been made. And of course, players may not drop from a tournament in exchange for or influenced by the offer of any reward or incentive. Doing so is considered bribery, and pretty much everybody involved is DQ'd.
There's bribery again.
Yep. All right, next section. 2.11, taking notes. Players are allowed to take written notes during a match and may refer to those notes while that match is in progress. I cast Thoughtseize targeting you. I can write down the contents of your hand. Basically, that is the most common thing that happens. At the beginning of a match, each player's note sheet must be empty and must remain visible throughout the match. Players do not have to explain or reveal their notes to other players. So let's, it's like I can take my notes in French, and if John doesn't speak French, that's his problem. I think the most common thing that I heard this referred to is, so English is the most common language at the Pro Tour. At a team pro, maybe not a team pro tour. It's probably like the old worlds, like because it was before the World Magic Cups. This one must have been one of the old worlds team tournaments. The English teams would use like lowbrow English slang to name some of the cards they were thinking of playing because nobody understands it but them. And they could refer to it like out loud, and everyone's like, What are they talking about? Yeah, you do not. Your opponent does not need to be able to understand the notes you make.
You,
Judges may ask to see a player's notes and request that the player explain the notes. Obviously, you want to do that away from the table because they're not required to explain that to your opponent. Now, players may not refer to other notes, including notes from previous matches, during games. Between games, players may have a brief set of notes made before the match. Honestly, commonly referred to as the sideboarding guide. They're not required to reveal those notes to their opponents, and these notes must be removed from play, usually tucked back into like a deck box, before the beginning of the next game. It says here excessive quantities of notes, more than a sheet or two, are not allowed and may be penalized as slow play. I think the like sideboarding guides typically I've seen like 1, maybe 2 pages. Like that's kind of the extent. Like this matchup do this matchup do this. Like that is allowed. That is, I would consider that style of notes to be the maximum amount of outside notes allowed. Note the use of electronic devices to take and refer to notes is permitted at regular REL. It is not permitted at competitive REL. Important difference there. Players and spectators, with the exception of the authorized press, may not take notes while drafting. Players may not reference any outside notes during drafting, carpool registration, or deck building. Players are allowed to refer to the oracle text of cards at any time. If they do, they must do so publicly in a format which contains no other strategic information. Honestly, like competitive REL, this is they call a judge and get an oracle text. Consulting online sources such as Gatherer is allowed at regular REL, and if a player wishes to view oracle text in private, they certainly may do so with a judge's approval, and with a judge usually. Artistic modifications to cards, so there's been more and more of this coming out. Artistic modifications to cards that indirectly provide minor strategic information are acceptable?
Yeah.
The head judge is the final arbiter. I mean, the head judge is always the final arbiter on all artistic modifications of cards, period, at all levels. And as far as what notes are acceptable for a turn, I suppose because it's not more than the outside notes that they would get. Okay, sure. All right. So next section. Go ahead.
2.12, electronic devices. So we just talked about regular REL. You can use electronic devices to keep notes. Competitive and professional rules enforcement level. During drafting, deck construction, and playing of matches, players may not use electronic devices capable of taking and storing notes, communicating with other people, or accessing the internet. So you can use your watch. That's about it, though.
Now there's an noted exception here, with the exception of taking a brief personal call with the opponent's permission.
Yeah.
The important thing to note is the boogie board has kind of become very popular. It's not technically an electronic device because it cannot store information. It's basically just a somewhat electronic notepad.
Well, there are actually some versions of the boogie board which you can save stuff.
Of course there is.
Of course.
Yep.
So the boogie board isn't, or I forget if it's save or like access something, or yeah, but there are some versions which are not kosher.
Yeah, as far as I like the basic models, we'll just say the basic models.
Sure. And I think that's really kind of a deviation on the head judge's part, but it's fine.
And then again, noting at regular rules enforcement level, electronic devices are permitted, but players may not use them to access information that contains substantial strategic advice or information about an opponent's deck. Oh, you're playing Jerry Thompson's deck from last night? I need to look up an oracle text. I'm going to look up your deck list on Star City Games. No. Players wishing to view information privately on electronic devices during matches must request permission from a judge, even at regular REL. The head judge or tournament organizer of a tournament may further restrict or forbid the use of electronic devices during matches. So head judge's discretion.
So 2.13, video coverage.
Which you won't have to worry about except competitive on REL, but continue.
Actually, I think we should just probably skip that.
I'll just skip it. If you want to know more about it, you can read
We are running a little bit behind, so
time is it?
I
I know we started late. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. I see where we're
We're
at.
gonna pick up the pace.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
So
we're gonna.
the next section we're skipping to is section 10, sanctioning rules. So section 10.1, participation minimums. So for a tournament to be sanctioned by the DCI, you need at least 8 players, or if it's a team tournament, you need at least 4 teams, which equals 8 players at least.
Whether that be like team sealed, which is 3 players per team, or two-headed giant, which is obviously 2 players per team, you need a minimum of 4 teams.
Yeah. If the participation minimum is not met, the tournament is no longer DCI sanctioned, and will not provide Planeswalker points. Also, if they're not met, the tournament organizer should report the tournament as did not occur.
Yes.
Or
I think technically what it says in WER right now is cancel event. You just cancel it like it didn't happen.
Yeah. 10.2, number of rounds. For individual tournaments, it's a minimum of 3 rounds, and for team and two-headed giant tournaments, it's a minimum of 2 rounds. If the minimum number of rounds isn't met, it's the same thing as above. It's not DCI sanctioned, no Planeswalker points, did not occur.
Yep. Important thing to note is you're not required to find a winner at regular REL events. If people are just if you have a 32-person FNM, you are still only required to run 3 rounds.
Yep.
And then whatever you're doing for your event, from there you do from there. If you have foils to give away, however you're giving those away, do that. But you're only required to run 3 rounds, no matter the size of your event. For regular REL.
The number of rounds should be announced at or before the beginning of the first round. Once announced, it cannot be changed. A variable number of rounds can be announced instead with specific criteria for ending the tournament. Like if a tournament has 20 players, it can be announced as 5 rounds, unless only one player has 4 match wins after 4 rounds.
Usually when I'm announcing like a PPTQ star, I'll be like, we currently have 16 players. However, if one more person comes in, we have to play another round of Swiss. That kind of thing.
Sure, that also. And the recommended number of rounds can be found in Appendix E of the MTR. I definitely recommend you use that at your tournaments.
I commonly refer to it as the chart. Important to note, if you are running a premier event, which for level 1 is basically a Grand Prix trial or helping with a PPTQ, you are required to follow Appendix E.
Yeah. Invitation-only tournaments, 10.3. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter for us. Moving on. Pairing algorithm. All right. Unless otherwise announced, tournaments are assumed to follow the Swiss pairing algorithm. Some tournaments may proceed to a single elimination playoff between the top 2, 4, or 8, or other number of players after the Swiss rounds are over. The Swiss pairing algorithm is modified in booster drafts tournaments, and then there's a hyperlink here to that pairing algorithm. For constructive tournaments that have a single elimination playoff, the recommended pairing method is to pair the players by the final Swiss standings, where 1 will play 8, 2 will play 7, 3 plays 6, and 4 plays 5. Then the winner of 1-8 plays 4-5, the winner of 2-7 plays 3-6, and then of course the winner of those will play each other. For a 4-player playoff, first place plays 4, second place 3, and then obviously the last 2 players remaining will play. For limited tournaments that have a single elimination booster draft playoff, it is recommended that only an 8-player playoff is run, because that is typically because that's how booster drafts are built for. And note, you use a random method to seat players around the draft table for a top 8 draft.
Yeah. So one thing to note with drafts, as a level 1 judge, you are expected to be able to run a draft.
Yes.
So draft seating. Just real quick. So if you had a perfectly round table, you have numbers 1 through 8. Those are your players. So you seat them around this perfectly round table. So the first round, after you're done drafting and constructing decks, the first round pairings will be the people directly across from each other.
The person the furthest away from them in the draft.
Yep. Yeah, you'll do that. Then the second round, if you look at number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the odd numbered seats, the winner of the odd numbered seat matches will face each other, and then the winner of the even number seat matches will face each other. So the winner of 1 versus 5 will face the winner of 3 versus 7, and the winner of 2 versus 8 will face the winner of 4 versus or
2 versus 6.
2 versus 6 will play 2 versus 8. And then obviously the last 2 players standing will play each other. So that's the seeding for a draft.
If you're in a premier event, the playoff options that we just talked about are required. They are not optional. Which the relevant ones are PPTQs and Grand Prix trials. Appendix B, time limits. So the required minimum time limit for any match is only 40 minutes. Now, it is very commonly 50 minutes. You see this all the time. The following time limits are recommended for each round of the tournament. Constructed and limited, 50 minutes. Single round elimination, quarterfinals, or semifinals, 90 minutes. Although, honestly, I usually see those listed as no time limit, so I actually recommend that over the 90 minutes. And single elimination finals is no time limit. The following additional time limits are recommended for limited tournaments. Sealed deck, 20 minutes for registration, 30 minutes for construction. Drafting, 30 minutes for deck registration and build. Team sealed, 20 minutes for registration and 60 minutes for construction. Team draft, 40 minutes for construction and registration after you've drafted your cards. Two-headed giant sealed, 20 minutes for registration and 60 minutes for deck construction. Again, this can all be found in Appendix B, so if you ever need the answer to this, that's where it is.
But just want to note real quick, these time limits may be on your level 1 test. So remember that the required minimum time is 40 minutes for a round. The recommended time is 50 minutes for constructed and limited tournaments. The other ones almost certainly won't come up.
Yes.
And then the limited tournament deck construction, sealed deck is 20 minutes for registration, 30 minutes for deck, and draft is 30 minutes for registration and construction combined.
Because you've already drafted your cards. Yeah.
So
the rest of those probably all.
Yeah, I don't think the rest will come up, but just keep in mind those numbers.
Actually, the two-headed giant ones come up.
Okay.
Two-headed giant sealed is 20 minutes for registration, 60 minutes for deck construction. Two-headed giant draft, 40 minutes for construction and registration because you've already drafted your cards.
Yeah.
So, the head judge of the tournament is the final authority on time limits for a tournament. So whatever they say goes. However, any deviation from these recommendations must be announced prior to and during tournament registration. Magic Premier tournaments have different time limits. These time limits can be found in the tournament or tournament series fact sheet on those events. We're going to skip that next section because booster draft timing is something that happens literally only at professional REL. So is this the last part here?
Yeah.
Sideboard regulations. All right. So sideboard, there's two big things. Constructed. Your constructed sideboard can be anywhere from 0 to 15 cards. Cards do not necessarily need to be exchanged on a one-for-one basis while sideboarding, but once you're done sideboarding, the resulting deck and sideboard must still be legal, so you must have at least 60 cards in your main deck and no more than 15 cards in your sideboard. At the beginning of each match, the constructed deck must be returned to its original composition. However, for limited, your limited deck must have a minimum of 40 cards and have no maximum size. If you want to put in 200 lands and try and get your Battle of Wits to go, more power to you. All drafted/opened cards in a limited pool that are not in the deck are considered to be part of the sideboard. All players may also request any number of basic lands to be in their sideboard. Your opponent's playing a mill deck and you want to sideboard in 200 basic lands, more power to you. Players participating in limited tournaments that do not use deck lists may freely change the composition of their deck between matches by exchanging cards from their decks in their sideboard without being required to return their deck to its original composition. This is only for limited tournaments. I believe they call this the continuous construction rule. This is only true at regular REL, which, I mean, it's pre-release, and we have a pre-release coming up this weekend.
Yep.
So important to note, like, you know, if you built a deck and it did terrible in round 1, and you think it's terrible, and you think you should have built it differently, you go right ahead and build it differently.
Yep.
You most certainly can.
That's actually something a number of players do not know, and I always like to let people know.
When I say a relatively recent change, I mean in the last 5 years, because I've been playing for 20 years now. So,
yeah. All right, so that pretty much covers the MTR.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There is a lot more MTR than what we covered tonight. these are the parts of the MTR that we expect to be on the test, the level 1 test, and the things that are the most relevant to level 1 judges. So
if you are very, very prepared, the thing I would most likely expect you to miss is a random MTR question, which covers something which
that we
is
missed.
just random.
That we missed in teaching you this class.
I know when I took a L1 practice test to help make the
practice test
that
you're
which
going to be putting up tonight.
We'll be putting up tonight. And like I got, I think it was one or two. No, I got one MTR question wrong and one JAR question wrong, just because
you judge a lot of competitive art.
Yeah, well, that was a JAR, and the MTR is just like there's so much going on.
Yes.
So
like you're expected to know basic stuff out of the MTR, but realistically, the MTR is a document you can reference should you need to. Obviously, you can't reference it during your test, something test, but when you're out in the world actually judging, that's what the MTR is for. Is to reference. So, are we gonna get the test up tonight? I know we had. I know you had some revisions to do on that. Why don't we just tell them we'll get it up by tomorrow?
Yeah, we'll get the test up.
That's safer. That gives you time to, because you're gonna work on a couple things.
I've been fighting with technology all night. It's been awful.
And no lies, I fired 2 of his questions. Sorry.
I mean,
to be fair, you've been putting most of the time into this because you have more time than I do. So there's nothing against it. But
I'm also going to argue with you over one of those questions. But
all right.
Regardless, we will have that up in its final form tomorrow. So,
closing notes here.
Yeah. So, October 2nd, Sunday, October 2nd, Rochester Judge Mob. It will be at Games and More in Byron. So I guess it's really the Rochester area Judge Mob.
Rochester area. Hang on. Something that I learned from a previous job I used to work at. Byron, Minnesota is closer to the Mayo Clinic than some parts of Rochester, Minnesota.
Yes.
So, Rochester area Judge Mob.
Yeah. So
hosted in Byron.
The Rochester area Judge Mob will be at Games and More in Byron. Now, we're gonna have free Chipotle. It's gonna be awesome. There will be judges there. There will be EDH. I'm sure there might be draft. I'm really hoping we are able to fire a draft.
I think one of the goals is to try and fire some kind of draft.
Yeah.
That is Kaladesh release weekend, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So Kaladesh.
Yeah. But besides that, it's a great chance for you to test for level 1. Now, on the test I have for you today, well, I'll have for you tomorrow. So besides the 20 questions, we're going to ask you just for some basic information so we know basically who is looking to test. So I'm just going to ask you name, DCI number, because both of those are really important for being able
They're required for us to make a test for you.
To make a test for you.
We need that.
I'm going to ask you if you're intending to test, and if so, will you be doing it at the Judge Mob? I'm going to ask you if you're in our area, or if you're not in our area, what state you're in, so we know who to get in contact with to get you tested.
Probably more of we give you guys a name to seek out this person to take a test.
Yeah.
Which probably the regional coordinator in that area. But anyways, continuing.
Also, if you're an optional field, but it's really not optional. If you're planning on taking the test, I need some way to contact you. So it can be a phone number, it can be an email address, it can be
it can be Facebook.
Yeah, it
honestly.
can be Facebook, Twitter, literally pretty much any social media. I'm either on there or I can get on there.
John is a little more social media than myself.
Yeah, so just give us some way we can contact you if there's any problems or anything.
And then if I remember right, because I got to look at this already because I was helping him with questions. The last part of the questionnaire is your Chipotle preference for those of you going to be at the mob. Just so that we have an idea what they're going to bring to the catering.
Just asking for a little bit of feedback as well at the very end of the test about the judge class, things we could improve on, things you thought we did well, whatnot. And also, any specific weeks which you would like us to go over.
Yes.
Um,
Because then we can work that into what we're going to talk about next week. Because next week we're going to be doing, it's going to just be review.
yeah.
It's going to be review of questions that we saw that people had troubles with on our test, and things that people asked us to go over.
Yeah, and like you said, also just if you're going to the judge mob, what meat you would like me to get for my free Chipotle catering. So,
All right. I
yeah,
think I know that we're over time, so does that do it for this week?
yeah, I think that pretty much does it for
All
this
right.
week.
Well, once again, I'm Stacy Winchell.
I'm John Aratingi, and thank you for joining us for Judge Class Week number 9. Almost to the end. Looking forward to it.